Well, we're just going to go ahead and get started. We have a very exciting live event for you all today, talking about this gorgeous, very special country that is Cuba. And we have a lot of esteemed guests that I will get to. But first of all, welcome to Adventure in Good Company's Exploring Beyond Havana Hidden Treasures of Cuba live event. We have a stacked agenda for you all today. So first of all, just welcome. We're so happy you're here, whether you're here live or watching the recording. We're going to go through and do a brief introduction to Cuba, the history, how it is there currently, our particular itinerary that we offer in Cuba, including the accommodations we offer, dining, and some facts about weather. And then we have some travel considerations as well. So if you have any questions throughout the entire live event, feel free to put those in the chat. And we have a whole section dedicated to Q&As at the end where we can address those. So if you want to keep yourself on mute, you're welcome to turn your camera on or off, whatever you're more comfortable with. And then we'll go into everyone's favorite part, a little trivia and a giveaway of some AGC merch. So without further ado, I will introduce our illustrious hosts that I'm lucky enough to co-host this webinar with. First, we have Andre. Andre has been a guide with us for many, many years and has guided 6 times in Cuba and has spent a lot of time there in the music section, learning a lot about their culture in that way. We're also joined by Deb, who is also an AGC guide and has lived and guided in Cuba as well. Myself, I'm a regional program director here at AGC, and I have also guided in Cuba several years ago now, but still very special to me. And finally, last but not least, we have Maria Rosa, who is Cuban, and she helps us manage and run this trip and kind of helped us design this whole itinerary. And so all of us are here to answer all of your questions and give you some facts about this beautiful country. So I will pass it over to Maria Rosa to talk a little bit about the history of Cuba.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to talk briefly about the history of Cuba. Cuba was discovered by Christopher Columbus in 1492. When the Spanish arrived, there was a population, about 10,000 native living in the island, who were mostly gatherers, fishermen, and hunters. And they were some were a little bit developed and had some pottery included in their practices. Unfortunately, our native population got abolished due to the diseases brought by the Spanish and the hard work they were put on. So to replace the native, the Spanish introduced the African slaves to work in the sugarcane fields. Sugar production was one of the main sectors during colonial times. And for that, they required the African slaves until slavery was abolished. And later on, at the beginning of the 20th century, some Chinese also came to work in the sugarcane fields. So that's why our population has different, it's very varied. We have some native and we have African roots as well as some Chinese, and it's a big ajiaco or melting pot that we call it. So Havana flourished due to its geographical position and the location of Havana and the bay of the city. So all the fleets from the other colonies would come here, and then guarded by the Spanish Armada would go straight to Spain. And so the merchants and the people had money, but they had no political influence. And so they wanted to start they started revolutionary movements and wars. So we had 2 major wars, one in 1868 and the other one in 1895, where Jose Marti stands out. And he is our national hero. And because thanks to him, the Second War was very successful. That's when the Americans joined the war on this Cuban side, but in 1898 they signed a treaty with Spain, leaving the Cubans out, and that's what you know as the Cuban-American War. I mean, the Spanish-American War. The Cubans were left out, but it was actually the Cuban-Spanish-American War. And then a neo republic was established with a great influence of the U.S. So lots of investments in Cuba, the United Fruit Sugar Company. It was a hub for the mafia at the time. Lots of American tourists being so close to the United States. So Havana flourished. And it was one of the most important cities in Latin America at the time. But as there was a lot of wealth, but lots of social disparity at the same time. So several revolutionary movements started to emerge in the 20s and so forth, until finally in the 50s, led by Fidel Castro, the revolutionary movement, 26 de Julio, started to fight the dictatorship. At the time, it was Batista, until 1959, when the revolution triumphed. So from that moment on, everything changed. The relations with the U.S. Stopped. The embargo was placed, and so Cuba kind of leaned towards the Soviet Union. And during those times, the situation in Cuba was good because we had preferential prices with the Soviet Union until the collapse of the socialist bloc in 1989, when the situation got really rough, and that's what we called our special period. So the government was forced once again to open up to tourism and foreign investments, and things started to improve towards the end of before the year 2000, and finally in 2017 things opened up a little bit more, and tourism was better with greater US influence at the time. So now I'm gonna give the floor to Deb, who's gonna talk about the modern era in Cuba.
Yeah, so part of what I wanted to also add to was the tourism in Cuba and how it has changed, because I found that extremely fascinating in my experience with Cuba. And my experience with Cuba, as we mentioned, was I was a guide there, and I also lived in Guantanamo Bay for 3 years. And Guantanamo, that was a while back, but often it has been asked, why does the U.S. have a base in Guantanamo Bay? And one of the answers has always been, well, a thorn in Castro's side, which of course no longer exists. But the real answer for that is that Cuba is very close to the continental shelf. So it offers one of the best deep water training ports of any place around. So they would bring ships down there and do training. That also brings in some amazing scuba diving, which is there as well as around the other parts of Cuba, which is also part of the trip. There's a snorkeling piece. But in 1915 to 1930, Cuba was one of the biggest, it had the tourists of the most tourism of any of the Caribbean islands, and that's when the mojito and daiquiri were developed. But the 1930s brought it back, World War II, Depression, and also one of the key things that changed was the lifting of prohibition in the U.S. And that pulled back because now you didn't have to go to Cuba, to Havana to get that mojito or daiquiri. And in 1950s, tourism was returning after all of that, but it was more of an organized crime aspect to it. And then, as Maria Rosa mentioned, the Cuban Revolution, but at that point in time, tourism made up, U.S. citizens made up 8 of 10 different of the tourists that were there. 1961 brought some foreign policy that it was against national interest to travel. And then that continued on in 1991, fall of the Soviet Union. And what Cuba did then was invested in tourism. But it wasn't until 2016 that Obama eased the travel restrictions to the United States, allowing commercial flights. So it is relatively recent that we have been able to travel to Cuba, into this amazing country. And it's very exciting. Some people have asked me, can you travel now? And of course, the answer is yes, you certainly can. And what you'll see in Cuba is it's a mixture of that old world charm and vibrancy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But one of the things I remember getting off the plane, and we'll talk a little bit more about the cars, but the cars aren't just a tourist attraction. A lot of people in Cuba have these beautiful vintage cars, and I think the Cuban population have some of the best mechanics to keep those running. And the people are kind, generous, and so welcoming, which makes travel to Cuba just one of the most amazing experiences that you'll have. It's a diverse, interesting history. It's very close to the United States, and it certainly, we'll talk about the weather, it will be gorgeous. So that's it for my Cuba Today section. So the next one, Andre.
Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Deb said about just the people. When you talk about the highlights of traveling to Cuba, there are so many, and we have a number of them listed here. One aspect that's not listed here is the people, just the warmest, sweetest, kindest, gracious, and truly generous people of some of the most generous people in the world, I think, for people who historically at times have not had a lot, but are so happy to share whatever they have, including their time and their passions and their love for their culture. And truly there is so much to admire about their culture. Along with the revival in tourism and the changes over the years, some questions I've been asked over my visits there is it still authentic? Well, authentic is kind of a weighted word, but it's still a vibrant, rich culture, very, very rooted to its traditions. And that's something I especially love about it. And the cars, yes, are spectacular. And they are not just tourist offerings, but family cars. And I actually love seeing people work on them on the streets, and that's a really common sight in all stages of refurbishment, from the raw shell to this magnificent masterpiece. And it really does speak to ingenuity, creativity, flexibility, and just intelligence of how you use these raw materials to put them together, and they require constant maintenance. And a lot of them have been converted to diesel, which I think historically has been more accessible and perhaps more affordable as well. So that's very unique as well. There are a number of World Heritage sites, UNESCO sites throughout the country. Some of them are urban, some are rural. We will have the opportunity, of course, to visit Havana Vieja, the old city of Havana, also Cienfuegos. And the World Heritage sites there really center around the architecture, the old city, beautiful, beautiful Spanish colonial era architecture. And in recent years, the government, and also with foreign investment, has put a lot of money into refurbishing a lot of the old city in Havana, and I dare say elsewhere in the country. And because it is part of the heritage, and it's a very complex history, but it's a vital part of the heritage, and it's so beautiful. And Maria Rosa will tell us about the history of Havana Vieja and Cienfuegos when we're there. Also, some of the natural sites, the Valle de Vinales Valley, where we'll have the opportunity to hike and visit a tobacco farm and learn about tobacco production and the long history of tobacco growing, and also just small-scale family farming. It's just a beautiful area with limestone outcrops covered in what I believe is actually called dry jungle, if I'm correct about that. Rich foliage and these beautiful outcroppings that just pop up from the valley floor. It's absolutely spectacular. And lots of people don't think about the natural history and the natural resources in Cuba, but we will have the opportunity to hike in the mountains, hike in the Magotes, snorkel in some crystal blue turquoise water, and do some kayaking. And there is so much to do in terms of outdoor adventure in Cuba. So we'll be really fortunate to be able to partake in that. My biggest love, admittedly, is music and art and dance and the cultural arts of Cuba, which are incredibly rich and diverse and supported from the ground up, supported by the government, supported by the people, valued at a level that I have not experienced anywhere else in the world. And it's remarkable, partly because of the infusion of cultures, which Maria Rosa spoke to. You've got this Spanish influence, obviously, deeply rooted African influence brought over by the slaves, mostly West Africa. And then the unique ways that that has blended in the Caribbean and in the Cuban diaspora, because Cubans have traveled all over the world for work and service, humanitarian projects, and they have brought traditions back. And that has resulted in incredibly rich cultural arts life. And in the music, we see that in forms like, of course, salsa, son, folk music, mambo, cha-cha-cha, reggaeton, which is kind of a Cuban take on reggae that you hear among the young people, and also really beautiful folk music traditions. So I'm looking forward to hearing some music and trying my really kind of pathetic salsa steps, and because it's so fun to share with the local people. And we'll see visual arts everywhere, not just installations, which are certainly plentiful, but also just on the streets. And it's just a colorful, rich cultural tradition that I'm just so happy to experience and share with you all. So I could go on and on, but I'm going to pass it off back to Maria Rosa now to talk about the specifics of our trip.
Right. So the dates that we have for the trip are on March 9th to March 17th, 2025. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the itinerary. So you will be arriving in Havana and departing from Havana. So the first day after arrival and your welcoming meeting and orientation meeting, we are going to visit Fusterlandia. Fusterlandia is located in a small part of the west of Havana called Jaimanitas, and it's the home of Jose Fuster, who is a local artist that has transformed the entire neighborhood into an installation. So if you, he has used tiles, kind of Gaudi style, and he has decorated and added murals to not only his home, but also the neighbors' houses, which is pretty and also very useful given the fact that Cuba is very humid and the tiles protect the walls, which is very good, and it helps Cubans not to have to spend a lot of money trying to maintain their homes. So from there, we're going to have lunch in the area, and we're going to continue to Old Havana. As Andrew was saying, it's the historic part of the city. It's a World Heritage Site, and we will be walking and visiting 4 main squares. Each of them had a specific purpose during colonial times, and it will allow you to get a general idea of how important and big Havana was during colonial time, and it will help you understand the history and everything else you will see in the island as you go. So the second day, we're going to leave Havana and we're going to head west, further west. Well, we are going to go all the way to Viñales. It's a long drive, but we're going to break it and we're going to stop in Soroa, about an hour from Havana. So Soroa is located in the Sierra del Rosario mountain range. It was an area, coffee was grown in the mountains, so there was some coffee grown in the area as well, but we will learn a little bit more about the coffee history when we visit Trinidad. So Soroa, the highlight is the orchid garden. with some like about 700 species of orchids. Some of them are native to the island, and it was the idea of a lawyer, a Spanish lawyer, to honor his wife because she loved the orchids. It's located in a beautiful, beautiful home, house that he built on a hill. It's a little bit hilly, but it's about 30 to 45 minutes walk. You will be seeing different, like I said, orchids in bloom, because it will happen to be, you will be there in March, and most of the orchids are in bloom at the time. And then from there, another good opportunity for a hike is a 1.6 miles in and out hike to a lookout point, where you will have the opportunity to see the surrounding area. So we will go back to the to our bus, and we will drive for about another 2.5 hours to get to Viñales. The highway is really fast. The only problem is that once we leave the highway, you will see that as part of our the unique characteristic of Cuba is that we still use horses as means of transportation, bicycles, and tractors. So when going to Viñales, the street is going to be narrow, and then it will all depend on if we have a bicycle on the way and a tractor, we will have to slow down. And so that's why it could be about 2.5 hours, a little bit longer to get to Viñales. So you're going to spend 2 nights in Viñales. Viñales is a really pretty, colorful town that, in order to maintain its status as a World Heritage Site, it has, the houses are very colonial, 1 floor, very colorful. And so it has some hotels where we will be staying as well, overlooking the valley. The valley is very pretty. Characterized by the mogotes, as Andrew was explaining, and also by the fact that it's one of the area where tobacco is grown in Cuba, given the richness of the soil and the humidity. So Cuban cigars are known to be one of the best in the world. And you will be learning about the process. You will be able to visit a plantation, and you will be able to see how they are rolled, and also visit a tobacco processing plant, which will be another step in the cigar making process. So Viñales is also very agricultural, and we will have the opportunity to have meals in farm-to-table restaurants. Then the longest drive will be on day 4. So we will be going from the west to the center of the island to the Ciénaga de Zapata, which is another national park. It's located in the south of Matanzas province. It is where Playa Girón, or the Bay of Pigs, is located. And so we will stop. We will break the trip again. Once again, we will stop in Finca Tungasuk. It's owned by a couple that are not Cubans, but they decided to establish in Cuba. She's a chef, so we will have the opportunity to eat, another farm-to-table opportunity, and to learn about their life in Cuba and how they have settled down and started growing and living off the land. Then from there, it's about another 2 hours, 3 hours, again, bicycles on the road once you leave the highway, to get to Corimacao. As Andrew was explaining, Corimacao is an art school where you will have the opportunity to see what the students have to offer and what they learn. Palpite, where it is located, and the population in Ciénaga de Zapata is very, very small. So having the opportunity to have access to the arts, it's something that was only obtained after the triumph of the revolution, and it's something that the revolution has tried to uphold. So this will be a great opportunity not only to learn about the arts, but also about the educational system in Cuba. And from there, we will go to Playa Larga, where we will be spending the night in a private home. And we will be also eating locally there in the house, cooked by the staff and the homeowner. The following day, we're going to leave Playa Larga behind, and we're going to head to Playa Girón, also located on the Bay of Pigs. And it's where you will have an opportunity to experience what Deborah was talking about: crystal clear water, warm, nice weather, and the coral reefs that are very well preserved. There's little fishing in the area, and sailing is also restricted in that specific area. So the coral reefs are very healthy. From there, it's a very short drive, 5-10 minutes, to the Enigma de las Rocas. It's a fairly short hike. A little bit, it's on limestone. A little bit, it's flat, but it's a little bit uneven when it comes to walking. But you will have the opportunity to see many bird species. Ciénaga de Zapata is a migration corridor, so not only birds that are only there for the winter that come from North America, but also local birds. You might have the opportunity to see our national bird, which is the Cuban trogon. You will see Cuban toddies and among other birds. It will end in a cenote, in a sinkhole. So you will have the opportunity to jump in and cool off if you want to, and you will learn about the geography of the area. Then we're going to continue to Trinidad. So after lunch, it will be about 2 hours drive to get to Trinidad. You might see along the way something very interesting, which is how Cubans dry the rice on the side of the road. So the South Circuit and Ciénaga de Zapata, because it has it's a wetland, it's great for growing rice. And after recollecting drying the rice on the side of the road is very unique to the area. So that might be very interesting for you to see, something very different. And then once we get to Trinidad, Trinidad is a really pretty and different town. It's close to the Casilda Bay, and so it was attacked by pirates and privateers during colonial times. It was very detached from the rest of the island, so the population was basically trading with the spirits and spices with the pirates and privateers. They had to develop pottery and knitting as main of their economic activity, and sugarcane was big. That's why it's known for the Valley of the Sugar Mills. It looks as it is trapped in time, cobblestone streets, lots of museums, colonial history. And you will have the opportunity to walk and learn about it once you are there. But it's also very close to another national park that is Topes de Collante, that is characterized by a lot of different hikes, and coffee plantation was big in the area as well. So on day 6, we're going to go up the mountains, and we're going to stop first at a small museum where you will learn all about the history of coffee, the way they did it in the area, which was the dry method. And but they will also mention the wet method that was more used in the eastern part of Cuba. And then you will go on a very nice hike, lots of vegetation, very green. And most of these hikes, they end in either a small waterfall or a pond where you will be able to cool off as well. The following day, we will go to Cienfuegos. It's a very beautiful drive because it's by the water, so you will be seeing different small villages where the Cubans hang out, and the rivers flow into the ocean as well. So Cienfuegos is totally different from Trinidad. Cienfuegos was a French settlement from the 19th century, and its design is what made it a World Heritage Site. So very pretty, very well maintained. It's a very clean city. Cienfuegos, the citizens of Cienfuegos are very proud of their city. It's a port city, very close to the ocean as well. It's on a bay. It's small, but you're gonna love Cienfuegos. The architecture is beautiful as well. So we will have the opportunity to visit a botanical garden on the way to the city. A little different from the orchid garden that we visit in Soroa, because the orchid garden is on a hill. This one is flat. And also the varieties of plants that you're gonna see there are totally different. They're not orchids per se. And we're going to have the opportunity to meet the choir, Cantores de Cienfuegos, which is one of the professional choirs we have in the island. As Andrew was explaining, music is very important in Cuba, and they actually go to specialized music schools. They're not just a part of the school program. So in order to become professional musicians, it's a long and dedicated career. So you're going to have the opportunity to exchange with one of the professional choirs of Cuba. And then on day 8, we're going to return to Havana. On the way back, we're going to stop at Ernest Hemingway's house. As you know, you may know Ernest Hemingway lived in Cuba for about 20 years, and he made his home out of Finca Vigía. And that's where we are going. That's the stop, the place where we're going to visit, where he lived there with his wife, Martha Gilhern, and some of his masterpieces were written. Cojimar, we're going to visit Cojimar, is where he used to hang out. His skipper, Gregorio Fuentes, lived in Cojimar. He used to hang out there with the sailors. The Old Man and the Sea was inspired in that town. And so we're going to see the place where Las Terrazas de Cojimar, where he used to spend his afternoons with his keeper. And we're going to have lunch at Ajiaco, a really delicious and a private restaurant where you will have the opportunity to try the ajiaco, which is a very thick stew that is characteristic of Cuba. It's a traditional dish that comes from our native. And like I mentioned before, our population is a big ajiaco. It's a melting pot with a mix of Spanish, African. So that's what an ajiaco is. It's a big mix of meat and roots and vegetables. So it's a delicious dish that you will have the opportunity to try when we visit El Ajiaco. And then we will return to Havana, where if you're interested in it, we can have some time to go to one of the biggest handicraft markets we have in Cuba. But you also have opportunity to purchase handicrafts along the way. In Trinidad, especially, very specific. Like I said, it's big on pottery and knitting. So if you like to bring some souvenir home that are either one of those, I advise you to purchase it in Trinidad, which is very unique from the area. So that's it as to the itinerary. So let's talk a little bit about the accommodations. I've been talking about the different places where you will be staying. So in places like, for example, Havana, we're going to stay in the Grand Aston Hotel. It's a modern hotel. It's a 5-star hotel. So we are going to, once we leave Havana, we're going to stay in hotels as well in Viñales, where we're spending 2 nights. But in Playa Larga and Trinidad, we're going to stay in private homes, which are Airbnbs. So Cubans, in order to make some income, they have transformed their homes or part of it into Airbnbs. They will have the bathroom inside, ACs. Some of them have safety boxes. They are very comfortable Airbnbs, and because in the areas, for example, in Playa Larga, the hotels are very small, and the private homes are better. We use and we rely on the private homes for those specific areas. Most of the time, we're going to stay in one house in Playa Larga. It's a big house, the biggest in the area, with 13 rooms. But for example, when we are in Trinidad, we have one main house, and then like next to the main house, we might have another house with 4 or 5 rooms, but everything will be close one next to the other. And then in Cienfuegos, we're going to stay in the Meliá San Carlos. Meliá hotels are very big in Cuba, and that's the best in town. And then back to Havana, we're going to stay again in the Grand Aston Hotel. I'm going to give the floor to Andrea and Deb to talk about the food.
Yeah, I'll start off on that one. And of course, the food is wonderful. And what you would expect to see is rice and beans with plantains, and sometimes by themselves, sometimes mixed. And the other one, and I think you mentioned this one, a traditional dish is, and forgive my pronunciation, ropa vieja. which is shredded beef cooked with fresh tomatoes, onions, and peppers with garlic and a little wine. That's a very traditional dish that you'll see. And of course, when you're Cuba is all surrounded by water, so there's some fantastic seafood that you'll see, shrimp, and all sorts of different seafood. The food is also the vegetables are very fresh. You can see in that picture there's a looks like a pineapple, some mangoes, and all of those kind of things that might be a little early when we're there. I'm not exactly sure, but they will be around and be delicious. Pork, one of the staples of the Cuban diet. We'll see a lot of that. We'll also, and Andrea will touch on this, there are vegan and vegetarian options too. So if you're hearing me talk a lot about meat, you don't need to worry that you do still have the options there too. One things that I really enjoyed was the Cuban coffee. It's a nice, strong, sweet coffee that's just delicious. And you can get it with or without milk. I always like mine with milk, and it becomes kind of a cappuccino heavy, sweet thing, but very unique to the island. And of course, rum. We all associate Cuba with rum, and you'll have all sorts of different varieties of rum. And like I think I mentioned earlier, it is the home of the daiquiri and the mojito. So those are two things that you might have an opportunity to try too. Andrew, you want to add to some of that? Whoop.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. I just want to point out in that middle slide there, what's going on there is the farmer is making these wonderful fresh drinks out of coconuts. He's taken coconuts from the trees on his property. He's shelled them and chopped off the top. The coconut water's in there, and he's squeezing fresh fruit, limes. As I recall, it was lime, orange, and grapefruit into the coconut, mixing it with the coconut water, adding some honey for sweetness, and a good tasting dollop of rum, and a big bamboo straw. So it was environmentally conscious and delicious. I don't know if we'll have the opportunity to do that, but that's just some, a homemade drink right there on his workbench. But as Deb said, the food is really delicious, and lots of people don't think about Cuba for its food. But in the cities, especially in Havana in recent years, there has really developed a very foodie culture. And people are being classically trained as chefs, either there in Cuba or going to Europe and coming back and opening restaurants. And so there are a lot of paladares, which are privately owned restaurants with well-trained chefs serving really beautiful food, both creatively prepared and very beautifully presented, as well as we're seeing there. We will be eating in very vetted restaurants. The food is very fresh and healthy and safe for you to eat. I especially enjoy the seafood, the fish, the eggs are very fresh. And when we're out in the countryside, we'll be eating more traditional food, more food like families eat at home, and simpler food. Very, again, nutritious, things like meat or fish or pork with vegetables either in a simple salad or sauteed vegetables, lots of root vegetables, which I love, plantains like Deb mentioned, also yucca, either fried or mashed, almost like a mashed potato, but it's made from the root vegetable yucca, sweet potatoes sometimes, really, really delicious, always rice and beans, sometimes separate, white rice and black beans, sometimes mixed together in a very traditional Cuban dish they call congri or moros y cristianos. And the congri, I believe, kind of just refers to the mixture, and the moros y cristianos is Moors and Christians. So you've got the two together there in the white rice and black beans together. Always delicious fresh fruit, depending on what's in season. Especially at breakfast, we'll see a lot of fresh fruit and fresh fruit juices. And always coffee. There's also tea. If you are vegan or vegetarian, we will do our very, very best to make accommodations so that you have plenty food and nutritious food. But I do encourage you to think about bringing some extras that might support you, whether that's your favorite energy bar, maybe some protein shake mix that you can mix with water in the morning if that's helpful, like a protein powder. A good old American jar of peanut butter goes a long way for protein and fat and calories if that's something that you like. So you can also now buy powdered peanut butter if that's a little easier to travel with. Or if you like soy milk in your coffee, you could carry a little powdered soy milk or powdered oat milk. So you can think about those things that you can carry to supplement your diet. And we will do what we can to help you in that way. But the food is good, nutritious, and plentiful. So trust me, I think you're in for a delight. And I will pass it off now back to Deb and Maria Rosa to talk about the hiking that we'll be doing.
I will kick this off, and because if you've been on an AGC trip, you understand that we do our levels. So level 1, 2, 3, or 4 or 5. This trip is rated a 2, and that's kind of, things are always a little bit confusing sometimes for people on what that actually means. And so we've got on the left-hand side of this screen kind of a description of that. And it means that you will be hiking, you will be having a mixture of kind of cultural experiences and hiking experiences. On some of the hikes, you may find that it's a little more challenging than you thought, and some of them might not be as challenging. But we've rated this trip this way because the elevation gain is reasonable, and as you can look through that slide, some of them are a little higher than others, and so you can have that expectation. And the total miles vary, and you can see sometimes on day 5 or 6 we've got 3 to 4, 3 to 7, 3, and then another 3 to 4, and that will really depend on the group and what you're all looking for. We always like to try to offer some variety within the trip so that it really suits everyone. And you do want to have a moderate level of fitness for this, and be ready for the challenges. I will let Maria Rosa talk about what the terrain is like, but the terrain can be varied throughout. You'll also see that you're having maybe a cultural experience in the morning and hiking in the afternoon, or vice versa. So it's not all day of anything at one time. So Maria Rosa, do you want to get a little bit more specific in some of those things?
So on day 1, as I was explaining when I was talking about the itinerary, what we will be doing is exploring the historic center of the city. So that would be the physical activity of the day. And also, well, Fusterlandia, you will walk around and go up to the terrace. But the main physical activity would be walking downtown, visiting the 4 main squares. It's cobblestone streets. So we advise comfortable shoes, right? And just minding not to trip. But it's very flat. It's just downtown Havana with the cobblestone streets. If it rains, it can be a little bit slippery, the cobblestones. But usually in Cuba, in March, there's not so much rain. On day 2, it's when we go to the garden, the orchid garden. I also talked about it before. The orchid garden is on a hill, so it's a little bit steep on the way up, and then there are stairs on the way down. You could also come down the same way down the hill, but it's really pretty when you go down the stairs because you get to see other types of plants and orchids. And then going up to the lookout point, it's steep, a little bit rocky, and even though it's short hike, it's steep and rocky, and you can stop along the way 2 times that are openings in the bush that you can look, you can take pictures, and usually there are locals, or they have their fruit stands, and you can have a drink, coconut, or have some mango if it is the season. It's not going to be the season for mango, unfortunately, but fresh pineapple or oranges, and the saoko, which is when you add a little bit of rum to the coconut water. And you might bananas, they're very sweet, very good, and you might also find them along the way up. So you have to be a little bit careful with the terrain here, because like I said, it's rocky, especially on the way down. It can be hard on your knees, but it's very short, and if you take your time and you go slow, the good thing is that it's a short hike. If it rains, it might rain in the area. It's a mountain range that hasn't been getting much rain lately, so that's why. So if it rains, it can be muddy. But sadly, in the area, they have not been getting much rain, which has affected also the river flow and the waterfall in the area. But it can be muddy when it rains. On day 3 is when we go to Viñales. We are going to be in Viñales. The hike here can be longer or shorter, because Viñales has many trails, and you can visit different tobacco plantations, and you can meet different cigar rollers. So depending on the group, like Deb was explaining, the distances can be adjusted, and so it's really flat. It's dusty, but it's flat. You will be walking among crops, so there are set path that you can take, but sometimes there can be branches on the way, so if you wear long pants to prevent any scratches, that would be great, although it's hot, and it can be totally doable in shorts if you would like to. They don't get much rain in Viñales. That's why it's very dry and dusty. So the chances of having mud in the area are very slim. Day 4, it's mostly on the bus, trying to go from one point to another. Although to get to Finca Tungasuk, you might have to walk for about a kilometer, because the bus cannot go all the way up to the entrance of the farm. But that is nice after being on the bus for a couple of hours. So it would be nice to stretch your legs. And then on day 5, it's the Enigma de las Rocas. Enigma de las Rocas is also a short hike, 3 to 4 miles. It can be shortened, but it's not really that long that it cannot be done all the way to the end. And the end is the best part, when you get to the cenote, where you can jump in and cool off and spend some time in the water, especially after the snorkeling. Because if you would like, you can freshen up and also take, get rid of all the salt water that you have from the ocean. So that would be nice and refreshing. And the terrain is limestone, as I mentioned before. So you have to be careful where you step on, but it's a very slow pace. The guide will be explaining. You will be looking for birds, so it's a bird watching opportunity. So you will take it slow as you see, and you walk, all the way to the end. There are low branches, so you might have to mind your head on the way in. But it's a very easy hike, flat, except for the uneven terrain and the limestone. Day 6 would be the longest hike, because it will be in Topes de Collantes. So this one might be the most difficult hike, not because it is extremely steep, but because it's longer. And also because if it rains, which in the area they do get rain every now and then, it might be muddy. So mostly some parts are rocky, but mostly it's flat terrain. Not flat, but with no rocks, even ground. And so day 7, it's the botanical garden that I mentioned. It's on a paved road, so it's very easy to walk on. It's not steep at all, and it's not very long. Usually we start midway and we go all the way to the end, but it can be made longer if we start from the entrance of the botanical garden. Day 4 is also again back on the bus, driving back to Havana and visiting museums. So there's minimal physical activity that day, and then you depart on day 9.
Great, thank you so much. As Maria Rosa said, it can be hot. It can also be rainy. Cuba is, they're in the Caribbean, so rain is very common, but it's not the hurricane season. And you do want to be prepared for rain, but in my experience in March, it's generally pretty stable, with an average daily temperature in the mid 70s, highs in the low to mid 80s, and lows in the mid 60s approximately. That can vary depending on where we are, maybe a little cooler in the mountains, also just a little cooler in the rural area because you're not in cities, with big buildings and lots of streets. So you need to be prepared for maybe cooler evenings, a warm sweater or a fleece, definitely a rain jacket. Some people like to bring a small traveling umbrella, which is fine, can protect you from sun if you like that, as well as rain. Absolutely a sun hat. But just be prepared for mostly a warm, humid spring, sort of like spring in Florida kind of experience, and with the possibility of rain, and you should be well prepared for that if you think of it in those terms. Going on to friendships and talking about friendships and culture. To me, this is the absolutely most important part of travel. This is why we travel, to meet local people and get to know about them and their lives and their culture. And above everything else that we might do, that is what you will remember the most. You will remember that guide who led us on that trail. You will absolutely remember Maria Rosa if you don't remember me. You will remember the children that you interact with on the street. You will remember the hostess in the Airbnb, the Casa Particular, where we stay, who has lovingly prepared this gorgeous family meal for us. You will remember the guide, the tobacco grower, and the woman showing us how to make the cigars. And you will, if you have enough time with those people, you will feel friendship. You will develop a friendship, even if it's short-lived because you're not there for very long, but you will carry with that. And then, of course, the friendships that we make on these trips with our companions, our traveling companions, and our guides who are with us the whole time, those friendships are often ones that become lifelong relationships. And if you've been on AGC trips before, you know that, or maybe you've had other group travel experience or just traveling with your own friends, you know how we grow when we travel, and when we're with people, and especially a group of women, we have the chance to really share ourselves and really develop that intimacy as we're experiencing together. It's an incredibly powerful and rich and potentially life-changing experience. And I think that upper right-hand photo just shows it so well. Those women are sharing their tobacco culture, their tobacco history. And if you're brave and want to share and take a little puff of a cigar, you're more than welcome to do that. And it's just a fun thing to share. So it's always a good thing to keep in mind about those relationships, because those are the memories that will last. And yeah, that's good. I'm going to turn it back to Maria Rosa to talk about the details of our travel.
So one of the most common questions we get is always currency in Cuba. Being from the US and also being used to paying with credit cards or debit cards, it's kind of challenging if you think about it, because Cuba, cash is king. So because we, because of the embargo, your cards won't work in Cuba, except in the Grand Aston Hotel, that they are able to create a portal, and you will be able to pay. If you have a drink in the room or something like that, or at the bar, you will be able to use your credit cards or debit cards there, because they create a portal for you to pay. But that's an exception, not the rule. So when you go to Cuba, we always recommend that you bring more cash than you think you may need. We usually recommend 600 to 800, because even though you don't have a lot of expenses during the trip, because accommodations and meals and things like that are included, if you want to buy souvenirs, or if you want to buy extra drinks, that are not, you get one drink included with the meals, but if you want to buy extra, you cannot pay with a credit card, then you will need to pay with cash. So lots of people in Cuba prefer American dollars, because the Cuban pesos, which is the local currency, are really worthless, and American dollars go a long way. So if you bring smaller bills for you to purchase extra drinks if you want to, or to purchase maybe bananas on the side of the road, they will appreciate the American dollars more than if you convert them into Cuban pesos. And also a dollar or two to purchase the fruit, for example, will help the farmers more. And so bringing smaller bills makes sense for tipping, for example, the maids in the rooms. And you can bring larger bills to tip the guides and things like that along the way. So so I talk about the money. If you have any questions about it, because usually people have lots of questions about the money, just please type them and I will be happy to answer them. But just bring in US dollars with smaller bills so that it's easier to pay, and in good conditions and not coins. Coins, they have to be exchanged at the bank, at the international bank. So it's very tricky for Cubans, because mostly they only have one in town or two in Havana tops. And bills that are in good conditions. If they're ripped or stained or written on them, then it's very hard for them to exchange them. Same thing, they have to go to the international bank for that. So they try not to accept those types of bills. But just American dollars work great in Cuba. Food and water. We've been talking about the food. We will be eating in private homes that are they serve food to tourists all the time. They have guests all the time. So the food there is treated, is filtered, and it's good to drink as well as the ice. They have experience with this. Same as the restaurants we will be visiting, but if you are on your own, you're walking around, just be very extra careful where you have a drink or what ice are you drinking or what food you're eating, especially in the streets. Fruit with peels are totally fine, but just be careful where you eat, because you don't know if the water they washed those vegetables or fruit is good or not. And to avoid any type of stomach issues, it will be better to stick to places that the food is going to be good to eat. The places we will be going with you are good places where you can have drinks, and it will be safe as well. We provide water at all times, and you bring your water bottle for you to refill. But in order to reduce the use of plastic bottles, we also ask if you have a live straw filter or something similar to bring it with you. But you will also have water provided by us all the time while you're on the ground. Cuba is a pretty safe place, generally speaking, except for the petty theft that you can find like anywhere. If you leave your things unattended, they can go missing. So just be cautious. Don't go around flashing a bunch of money. But those are general rules when you go to travel, when you travel abroad, right? So you can just take what you need for the day, have it in a safe place at the rest, and just have your regular money pack where you keep your money, keeping track of your things, your cameras, your backpacks at all times, not leaving them unattended. And then other than that, it's really, really safe to be walking out and about. Just not very late at night, even though like it's safe, it's better, you're not familiar with the ground, you will be with the guide at all times. That if you decide to explore on your own, just take into account that too late at night, it just go where there is light and things like that. But it's very safe, especially for tourists, because tourism is very important for the Cuban government. Travel insurance is required. We recommended when you purchase your ticket to go to Cuba, most U.S. airlines include the minimum required by the Cuban government. So you're just coming from the U.S., your boarding pass is the proof they need to know that you have insurance to go to Cuba. However, we recommend supplemental insurance at your discretion. And now Andrew's going to talk about the Afro-Cuban culture and the classic cars.
Thank you. Yeah, just I'm hoping through this hour that we've been together that you've sort of picked up on our respective passion for Cuba. And one piece that I really love is the Afro-Cuban culture in particular. Cuba has a very large Afro-Cuban population, and their influence is seen in food, in music, in dance, in visual arts, and it's just lively and always around a sense of community. And that comes from their history and, taking care of each other in very, 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 very horrific times. But it continues through modern day with a deep, deep cultural connection and a deep community and familial value. And I am always really intrigued the way cultures come together. And the one type of music that I mentioned, rumba, which is a very, very, it's a distinct form of rumba. It's not like South American rumba. And it's a very, very unique music and dance form to Cuba. And it's closely related to the spiritual practice, the Cuban spiritual practice of Santeria, which is a very interesting fusion that comes from slave traditions, West African traditions, very, very old, many hundreds of years ago, as well as Catholicism. And as Catholicism spread throughout the Western Hemisphere and native populations, or more specifically non-Spanish populations, were introduced to it, often under pressure to practice only Catholicism, they were able to, they being in this case slaves, were able to preserve a lot of their spiritual beliefs and practices and their musical traditions by incorporating elements of Catholicism that outwardly looked very traditional Catholic, but inwardly had very deep meanings to them. And we still see this in rumba, in the music and in the dance. And a lot of the dances express the stories of particular saints, female and male saints, and it's really phenomenal. If we have the opportunity to see that, I hope we will. So there's that. And then just to finish up with the classic cars, I do believe we'll have an opportunity to take a ride in the classic cars, which is so fun. And when you do, I think it's really important to remember always that culture does not exist in a vacuum. This is this little historic gem that Cuba has out of necessity. And I think it's always important to remember that and to honor the accommodations that have been made over generations to survive and to produce what really is an incredible art form, as well as just a basic practicality. So there's just so much to discover and explore and celebrate in Cuba. So I do hope you'll join us, and I thank you for being with us today. And Mariah's going to finish up with some Q&A and take it from there. So thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's my cue. So if anybody on the webinar has any questions for myself, Andre, Deb, or Maria Rosa while we're live, feel free to unmute if you're comfortable with that, or post something in the chat. We are happy to answer any of those questions for you. I know there are probably several. I'm hoping we covered a lot of them. Thank you so much for your time. We are thrilled that you took some moments out of your day to spend with us, and we will hopefully see you very soon.